So currently there are 30 million Americans with diabetes and another 80 million with prediabetes who will eventually develop diabetes. So it's really the epidemic currently in the US. And commonly with diabetes, what occurs are what are known as complications. And the most common prevalent complication of diabetes is neuropathy. What neuropathy is when the nerves in your feet and your hands undergo a degeneration and you lose the sensation in your feet and your hands. Neuropathy is the most common cause of ulcers, amputations, and is most commonly associated with cardiovascular or heart disease. So in our laboratory, we've tried very hard to understand why people with diabetes develop neuropathy. And what we have found is that it's just not the high blood sugar that causes neuropathy, but also the high fats that are in the blood of patients with diabetes, along with hypertension and obesity, the fact that patients are frequently overweight. So our goal is to understand how the nerves actually utilize fats and glucose, other lipids, as a source of energy, and why that goes awry in diabetes so that we can develop very targeted therapeutics to stop the progression of diabetic neuropathy as well as to develop new therapies.
Unfortunately, there's no treatment for diabetic neuropathy, but recent studies show that the development of diabetic neuropathy correlates with increased levels of fat in the blood. These increased levels of fat could cause damage to sensory neurons, which extend into the arms and legs to transmit sensory information back to the brain. In order to function, these neurons require energy throughout the entire length of the neuron, which goes the entire length of the legs and arms. The mitochondria produces energy and must be transported throughout the entire length of the neuron by specialized motor proteins. Our studies focus on understanding how different types of fats impact mitochondrial transport in sensory neurons.
Over the past 20 or 30 years, the only therapy that's been available to people with diabetic neuropathy has been tight glycemic control, so tightly controlling your blood sugar. But what we've recently discovered is that in type 2 diabetes, even if you tightly control your blood sugar, you can still develop diabetic neuropathy, or if you already have neuropathy, it's going to get worse. So clearly there's other metabolic factors that are really contributing to this nerve injury. And what we've come to understand is that it's actually the blood lipids or the blood fats that are becoming injurious or lipotoxic to these nerves. So if we can understand exactly how those lipids are injuring the nerves, perhaps we can develop targeted therapies to intervene then and there to stop neuropathy in its tracks.
People with diabetes have an increased risk of cardiovascular diseases such as heart attack, arrhythmias, etc., which increases the mortality in this group of people as compared to the general population. Here in our lab, we are trying to find out new treatments for the complications of diabetes such as diabetic peripheral neuropathy and cardiovascular autonomic neuropathy, which substantially increase the risk of early mortality in people with diabetes. Our lab is focused on finding novel treatments which could reduce or prevent these complications.
Recently, many studies show that there is a strong connection between metabolic syndromes such as diabetes and obesity with the increased risk of cognitive dysfunction and especially Alzheimer's disease. In Western lifestyle, people eat higher calorie food and also live longer thanks to the advanced medicine. However, this combination puts people in high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Therefore, it is imperative to understand the connection between these two diseases. I am trying to understand how obesity and diabetes affect the specific proteins involved in the development and progression of Alzheimer's disease.
One of the things that I'm more recently working on is looking at differences between male and female mice and how they develop this peripheral neuropathy in the setting of metabolic disease. Interestingly, from the literature, female mice, when they're fed a high-fat diet, are resistant to developing a lot of the metabolic abnormalities associated with disease compared to the males. And this is attributed to the way females have different distribution of fat and how the sex hormones, estrogen, has a protective role in prohibiting the development of these diseases. We discover that even though the females who appear to be normal compared to to their high-fat male counterparts, they still develop neuropathy. And this leads us to believe that one of the insulin resistance, which was once thought to be a contributor to development of peripheral neuropathy, is not actually a driver of the disease, and that there are other mechanisms in play. And so all of this is being performed with translational therapies in mind, so that we can bring this from the bench to the bedside.